January 15th, 2009. New York TRACON, Westbury, New York. Air traffic controller Patrick Hudson slides into the LaGuardia departure radar seat, 3:12 in the afternoon. 15 quiet minutes into his shift, his radio crackles with 3 words no controller ever wants to hear.
220.
220.
Tower, stop your departures, got emergency returning. It's 1529. He bird strike. He lost all engine. He lost the thrust in the engines. He's returning immediately.
Cactus 1529. Which engines?
He lost thrust in both engines. He said.
Got it.
Cactus 1529.
For the next few minutes, a pilot Hudson has never met tells him, calmly, that both engines are gone. People don't survive landings on the Hudson River, Hudson said later. I thought it was his own death sentence. For the next 30 minutes, Patrick Hudson believed he had just listened to a plane full of people die. He was wrong. This is what actually happened in the 3 minutes in between. You're watching Black Box Breakdown. Miracle on the Hudson. What the black box actually recorded. Chapter 1. An ordinary day. LaGuardia Airport, New York. US Airways Flight 1549, NA320, is bound for Charlotte. Nothing about the morning suggests it will be remembered. By 2009, US Airways had one name and one operating certificate. But its pilots were still fighting over whose seniority actually counted. A labor war that had nothing to do with this flight, and everything to do with who was in this cockpit. In the left seat, Captain Chesley Sullenberger, 57. A former Air Force fighter pilot, a glider instructor since his first year at the academy, 29 years into an airline career that started before some of his passengers were born. In the right seat, First Officer Jeffrey Skiles, 49. He'd actually been a captain on other aircraft before the industry gutted itself after September 11th and bumped him back down to first officer. Skiles had gotten his rating on this exact aircraft 2 weeks earlier, 37 hours in type. This was, in fact, the very first trip he and Sullenberger had ever flown together. 150 passengers board, a lap-held infant among them, 3 flight attendants, Doreen Welsh, 38 years in the job, working alone at the rear, Sheila Dale and Donna Dent up front.
Cactus 1549, departure to contact line, maintain 15,000.
Maintain
3:24 p.m. Cleared for takeoff, runway 4. The climb is smooth. Nothing about it has ever been recorded as remarkable in any of the thousands of flights that leave LaGuardia every single day. Chapter 2. The birds. 2 minutes after takeoff, at 2,818 feet, the captain says one word on the recorder: birds. A flock of Canada geese, later confirmed by DNA analysis, goes straight into both engines. Fan speed, core speed, both collapsing within seconds of each other. In the cockpit, Sullenberger takes the controls from Skiles. My aircraft, he says. Skiles starts running the checklist for a dual engine failure, a procedure almost no airline crew has ever had to use for real.
If we can get it for you, do you want to try to land 1813?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
Joey 2760, turn left 070.
070, join 2760.
Hi, Cactus 1549. It's going to be left traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
Okay, what do you need to land? Cactus 1549, runway 4 is available if you want to make left traffic to runway 4.
I'm not sure we can make any runway. What?
Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds. We've lost thrust in both engines. We're turning back towards LaGuardia. Under the stress of the moment, he even misstates his own flight number.
So we're to our right. Anything in New Jersey, maybe Teterboro?
Okay, yeah, off your right side is Teterboro Airport. Do you want to try to go to Teterboro?
Yes.
Teterboro, Empire, actually LaGuardia departure guy, emergency inbound.
Hey, go ahead.
Cactus 1529 over the George Washington Bridge, wants to go to the airport right now.
Wants to go to our airport. Check. Does he need assistance?
Yes, it was a bird strike. Can I get him in for runway 1?
Runway 1, that's good.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280, you can land runway
Right.
1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
Unable. Each time, the same word. A jet with no engines does not turn around and land like normal. Every option Harton offers, Sullenberger has to refuse. Then Sullenberger says the sentence that ends the search for a runway completely.
We're going to be in the Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus? All right. Chesley 2760, contact New York 126.8.
2068, Joey 276.
Cactus 1549, radar contact is lost. You also got Newark Airport up at 2 o'clock in about 7 miles. Eagle 5 4718, turn left bank 210.
210, 4718. I think he said he was going in the Hudson.
Cactus 1529, you saw.
Chapter 3. The Decision. Sullenberger later called it 208 seconds. From bird strike to committing to the river, the report's own timestamps put it closer to 213. Either way, under 4 minutes to decide, correctly, with a plane full of people, and be right. No engines. No runway close enough. A glider instructor's entire second career had, without either of them knowing it, been training for exactly this. Skiles is still running the dual-engine checklist, a procedure built for altitude, not for a jet with 3 minutes left in the air. There isn't time to finish it. The last words on the recorder. Both men, together, bracing a plane full of strangers for a landing neither has ever practiced for real. Chapter 4. The Hudson. About 8.5 miles from LaGuardia, the airplane touches down on the Hudson River. Air temperature, 19 degrees. Water temperature, 41. Cold enough to kill on its own in minutes. All 155 people aboard evacuate onto the wings and into the slide rafts. Structural debris tears into the rear cabin. Flight attendant Doreen Welsh, alone back there, is seriously hurt. She kept directing passengers toward the exits as the water rose around her feet. She evacuated last, after everyone else was off. The final tally from the official investigation, 155 aboard, 5 seriously injured, 95 with minor injuries, 0 dead. Chapter 5, The Rescue. This is real footage. A US Coast Guard harbour camera running that exact afternoon, catching the plane itself down in the river minutes after the ditching. The ferry Thomas Jefferson, captained by Vincent Lombardi, is already crossing the river. He reaches the plane in roughly 3.5 minutes. Before he even arrives, he warns his own crew. "I saw people walking out from the plane," Lombardi said, "and it kind of looked like they were walking on water." 14 NY waterway ferries respond. Between them, they pull roughly 143 people out of the freezing river. The Coast Guard and FDNY get the rest, all 155 alive. Chapter 6. No verdict needed. Investigators needed the aircraft itself. Days later, real US Coast Guard footage shows the actual airframe, lifted from the river at night, headed for examination. The National Transportation Safety Board's official finding, the ingestion of large birds into each engine, resulting in an almost total loss of thrust, and the subsequent ditching on the Hudson River. Here's what almost never happens after a US air disaster. Not one passenger, not one crew member, sued the airline or the plane's manufacturer over the accident itself. An aviation attorney who specializes in exactly these cases called the total absence of litigation amazing. There was no death, and very little to argue was anyone's fault. The board issued 34 safety recommendations. Engines now have to prove they can survive bird strikes at low, reduced power speeds, exactly the scenario that brought this plane down. That rule took the FAA 14 years to finalize. Around New York's airports, wildlife management programs expanded. Over 70,000 birds removed from the area in the years since, an unglamorous, ongoing consequence of 3 minutes over the Hudson. Chapter 7. Where they are now. Sullenberger retired from the airline in 2010 after 30 years. He later served briefly as America's ambassador to the International Civil Aviation Organization and has spent years since as a public voice for aviation safety. Skiles, the first officer with 37 hours in that cockpit, went on to represent tens of thousands of pilots on safety policy and only retired in 2024, 15 years after that flight. Doreen Welsh, hurt in the rear cabin, made that flight her last before retiring and has spoken openly since about living with the fear it left behind. Sheila Dale retired exactly 10 years later on the anniversary itself. Patrick Harton, the man who spent 30 minutes believing he'd heard everyone die, eventually left the FAA too. His own account of that afternoon is now part of the public record in his own sworn words to Congress. As recently as this year, one of the passengers aboard that day was still speaking publicly, fighting alongside flight attendants for stronger cabin crew staffing rules and naming Welsh, Dale, and Dent by name as the reason she survived. And the aircraft itself, the actual airframe that carried all 155 of them onto that river, has sat on public display in a Charlotte museum since 2011. What stays with me about this one isn't the landing, it's Patrick Harton. 30 minutes believing he'd just listened to a plane full of strangers die before a colleague finally told him they survived. He didn't believe it until he turned on a television and saw it himself. Every other story on this channel ends with an investigation finding someone to blame. This one didn't need to. 2 tired men, a checklist, and 3 minutes was simply enough. 155 people walked away. The aircraft that carried them never flew again. It still sits in Charlotte. If a crew that got everything right pulled you in, wait until you see one that got almost everything wrong. Our video on Colgan Air 3407. Subscribe to Black Box Breakdown.
If this one got under your skin a little, good. That's the point. And it only keeps happening because people like you keep showing up.
So do one thing for me. Hit subscribe. It is free and it is the whole reason Black Box can keep taking these disasters apart.